So how are you today, Eddie? Welcome to the Modern Frequency interview. I'm Robert.
I'm doing very well. Thank you for having me on, Robert.
No problem. So first tell me about yourself and your musical upbringing.
I was born and raised in Los Angeles. I live in Portland, Oregon now, where I've been for about 7 years. I came to music kind of late. I mean, I always loved music as a kid. I just kind of listened to, whatever it was on K-Rock, the kind of the main, LA radio station growing up. So, it was Sublime and Smashing Pumpkins and that kind of stuff. But I never really had any interest in playing music at all. Just didn't really cross my mind. And then when I was, I think about 15, I sort of like stumbled on one of my dad's Bob Dylan CDs, and I didn't know. I mean, I'd heard the name before, but I couldn't really pick. I don't think I could pick them out of a lineup. And it was the album Freewheelin' Bob Dylan. The first song that comes on is "Blowing in the Wind," and I was like, "Oh, okay, I know. This is." I was just thinking of that kind of, not that I knew Peter, Paul, and Mary or something, but that kind of type of folk music that I thought, okay, this, kind of folky anti-war sort of stuff. And then the next song comes on and it's Girl from the North Country, and then it's Masters of War, and then it's just kind of down the line, Hard Rain's gonna fall, and Don't Think Twice, It's All Right. And it was like something was unlocked in my brain, and I all of a sudden, I'd never had any interest in playing music really before that. And I just felt this weird compulsion. I had to learn how to play these songs.
Hmm.
And so my dad, who played a bit, he showed me, enough chords to play "Don't Think Twice, It's All Right," and then I just sort of became obsessed and just never, put it down. And that was kind of that was the sort of beginning of it all.
Your music touches upon obviously Americana and folk roots. Is that the direction you wanted to go in then? Since your Bob Dylan discovery.
Yeah,
That's
I think, and I like that idea of kind of, as I was branching off from him, of kind of going backwards to people like Dave Von Ronk or Woody Guthrie or Mississippi John Hurt or Ramblin' Jack Elliott or something like that. And then also the other kind of people, that the tendrils went out to, of like the Leonard Cohens and the Paul Simons and, Randy Newman and stuff like that. Um, and it was always the music that I was interested in. I always loved the playing acoustic instruments. I picked up the banjo and I play some clawhammer banjo as well. Um, and so, yeah, there was not, I mean, I love all sorts of different genres of music, but this was the only one that I was ever really interested in playing.
that's funny though. You told me you were into Smashing Pumpkins, Sublime, and grew up on K-Rock based out of LA.
But even those bands, or even Nirvana, like I always loved the unplugged Nirvana album. I love that one. And so much of the great Smashing Pumpkin stuff of um, Melancholy and the Infinite Sadness, and also a lot of great Sublime stuff too, where it was acoustic guitars, or I just always liked the kind of stripped down feel of things.
Cool.
And I always loved sort of, my favorite thing to listen to was always, a person with one, with their instrument and their voice, and that has always been um, uh, really my main sort of musical love. And then so for me, it's kind of a combination of it, of when I tour, sometimes I go with full band or maybe with just one or two members of my band, and a lot of times it'll just be me, and having that kind of malleability of taking these songs and uh, building the arrangements in the studio, but still, at the heart, the way they're always written is just with a voice and guitar, and that's it.
You mentioned Nirvana's Unplugged album. That was like a milestone in rock and roll music, in my era, anyways.
About, I mean, I've listened to it a whole bunch of times, and I've seen, the video of it that was on MTV. But I didn't know, that so many of those songs were Meat Puppet songs and were all the, but I still love, there's just the ones that just, even that, like Jesus Don't Want Me as a Sunbeam, and all these different ones that are just, they're such amazing performances, and they just kind of stick with you always. And I loved, growing up. I mean, I loved Nevermind and In Utero and that kind
Yeah.
of stuff too. But yeah, there was something about that one that um I don't know, maybe even though that was, probably a good, I don't know, a decade before I started playing music. It probably, that hung with me.
Yeah. So how did you get signed to Network Records?
So I had put out, um, I'd made one album kind of in my sort of in my home, a little bit in the studio, and I was going to put that out, and then I'd met the great English singer Laura Marling, and she was in one of those roundabout ways. She was my now wife, but my girlfriend's at the time girlfriend's friend's boyfriend's brother was friends with her and brought her to a show. One of those things,
Wow.
who I'm grateful for all of them. And because Laura and I connected, and she really had the idea of, I think it was her polite way of saying that the little, album that I'd made, with no, I mean, I didn't know what the hell I was doing with one mic, in my house with my buddy Gabe Theenberg, who I still play with and played on this new album. Um, and she had the idea of, why don't you just film a video of you guys performing? Because I think it was a way of saying you guys are much better live than this album was. And so we got into the studio and we recorded this little 5-song EP that was really mainly just to be filmed. And we thought, well, let's just, there's no isolation. We're all in a room together. We'll see how it sounds, if it's kind of good enough to all work. And the first thing we did was this "Dancing in the Dark" cover that Laura sang with, and then Gabe Feenberg played the accordion, and my friend Polly played the violin on. And right away, we just felt like, oh my god! And basically, just kind of threw away that album. I ended up putting it out years later, but thought, well, let's just put this EP out. And from there, it had gotten some good play on Spotify, along with I think a subsequent album I'd put out, Polyhymnia, and then the founder of the label, Terry McBride, reached out to me, and just kind of out of the blue. I hadn't really, I'm not super plugged in to really much of anything, uh, and so I'd asked a friend of mine, I go, do you know that network? And he was like, yeah, the giant label. I was like, oh yeah. And I was like, so I just went and I met Terry at a coffee shop in Hollywood, and that was kind of it.
Very cool.
I like their whole vibe and their ethos
Yeah, yeah.
and their catalog and everything, and it was right away seemed like it was a great fit.
Amazing. Your new album is called Signal Fire, and you were quoted as saying it's a theme emerging from the haze of isolation. And did that have a lot to do with COVID at the time, or?
Sort of. I mean, I think it's like different levels of isolation, but it was what was interesting about it was I up until when I did that album, that live EP that's called Blood and Rust. Every album since then I recorded totally live. It was just us in the studio, kind of we capture what we capture, um, and I love that. I loved having um, all the weird mistakes that'll come from it, and all the serendipitous stuff that just comes from being in the room together. What you capture is what you capture. And then Broken English, which was an album I put out in 2022. Um, I recorded that one. I think we were scheduled to get into the studio for that one, in like April of 2020. And so all of a sudden, we got all these kids between us. The studio I recorded in is down in Los Angeles. It's a great place called 64 Sound that my buddy Pierre DeReader um, owns and runs, and he mixes and engineers all of our stuff. And it felt like, I don't know, but I got a little setup here that I do some, I've put out some stuff that I've recorded from home before. I did a covers album, and it's like a Christmas album and things like that for my label. And I thought, let's just try doing a remote album and we'll see how it works. And it ended up being a lot of fun. It was great. It was, it's an interesting thing when I'm in the studio and I'm recording all this stuff live, because it feels like I feel sort of like I'm the writer and director and actor in the scene all at the same time, where I'm just trying, I write these very densely lyrical songs, And so I'm just trying to play the kind of intricate guitar parts and remember the words while also paying attention to what's going on here, and what's happening with the drums here, and what's the range. So all of a sudden, breaking all that up, I'm lucky that the musicians I play with are producers in their own right, so they have their own studios, and we could just kind of bounce stuff to each other, and I could sit with the drums a little more and be like, okay, this is good. Why don't we just maybe move this a little bit and change this. And there was something of that kind of like warm blanket of isolation that I think some of us got from COVID, that some of us get of I think mistaking a sort of laziness or something for or mistaking isolation for solitude or something like that. Like it just was. And so there was a part of me with this newest album where I thought, I don't know, maybe I just record them remotely from now on. It was nice. I didn't have to leave my family for big chunks of time. It didn't, and I thought, well, either way, let me just get together with the band and let's just rehearse the songs that I'd written for this new album. And I got together, and within seconds of playing, it was just like a what was I thinking thing of just the fog lifting and being like, this is it. This is being. And I hadn't played with my bandmates at that point because of COVID and all, just the circumstances of where I was at in my album cycle and everything. For it had been about 2 years since I'd seen him, and so it was the feeling of that kind of immediacy of that connection and of community and all of those things that I think it did make me realize afterwards about how much of this album uh, was about a kind of I think it's like emerging from the haze of yeah, part of the isolation of COVID, but the world's been very isolated and atomized, years and years before any of that. Um, and there's the isolation of the early stages of parenthood and the isolation of so many different things in life. And it felt a little bit, and the same thing of I felt like my last couple albums were very I don't know, more heady sort of albums. I think I was reading a lot of stuff and was listening to a lot of things, and it was very, and I felt like it was a purge of those, of that way of thinking, and kind of coming back to myself, and a feeling of like, what is really here? What is the most important thing to me? What is these kind of vital things in my life, around me and in my head and everything? And it was, and so that's sort of what the genesis of the album I think was, in a way that I realized after um, the recording process, that was really kind of at the core of what the album was.
Rolling Over Me, what's the song about? I like that song
I
too.
think that. Thank you. That one to me seems like it's like the thesis, kind of like all those things that we just talked about. That was really a sort of coming back from, maybe like a loftier way of thinking, and coming from a more sort of like intellectualizing things to coming back into your body. And in that way, it's kind of like, what is it? And I think it's there. It's a love song. It's kind of a passionate song, and uh, and that's pretty much what that song's about.
Okay. You shared the stage with Tyler Childers. Is that how you pronounce his name?
It's Childers.
Childers. Passenger, who I'm familiar with, and Leanne Womack also I'm familiar with. What were those
Do you
experiences?
know Tyler Childers?
Yeah, I know. I've heard of him as well. Yeah. What were those experiences like sharing the stage with those artists?
They were great. I mean, the Tyler Childers one was great. I'd never heard of him. It was a bit of a kind of a late. He was doing a West Coast run. Something happened with their supporting act, and I think maybe we had the same booking agency or something at the time. Um, and he was kind of just. I think he had just gotten some article or something in Rolling Stone or something about him, and so it was this. He's kind of just starting to pop in this way. And so we played from San Diego up to Seattle, uh, but it was kind of clear that the rooms that we were playing were sort of so much smaller than he could now fill all of a sudden,
Hmm.
which was an interesting thing. And I knew these guys were from Kentucky and West Virginia, and I'm sure being a West Coaster, I had my own preconceived notions about who he and his band would be, and they were just such smart, interesting, sweet, good, unbelievably talented guys. And so his success that he's had since then, I mean, he's become an enormous act that it
Yeah.
was one of those things where you're like, this could not be happening to better people, kind of across the board of all of them. And they were, yeah, really good guys, very fun shows. The Passenger was also a pretty brief one where I just jumped on for a few dates. Um, but again, he was, what such a nice guy, such a great crew. And we played some really fun rooms in Nashville and Atlanta, I think were the spots that we hit. And then the Leanne Womack one was a very funny, kind of strange one of uh I didn't get to spend too much time with her, but spent a bunch of time with the band, who's such great guys. And her I think her sound engineer for the tour, her front of house guy, um, was he had worked. I can't remember his name, but he was this kind of unassuming guy from the South, and I guess he had worked on The Last Waltz and all these things, and he was just one of these. I think he wrote for um, oh God, huge. I can't remember who it was, but it was just meeting this real interesting group. It was another sort of West Coast run where some of the days were fantastic and beautiful. It was a thing where I was like, I don't know if my music really fits. It's not super far off, but it's a different sort of vibe than I
Mm.
think the Leanne Womack folks that were probably there to see. But we played some great, interesting shows. We did one at um, Buck Owens Crystal Palace I think it's in Bakersfield, and that was just a trip. That was bizarre. And they were almost all great except for the one in somewhere in Northern California. I think it was Petaluma or something. We were playing at this theater, and I got on stage. It was just me, and it's a Friday night, and everyone's rowdy. And I got into this theater, and it was, you'll feel bad if you start a show and everyone's quiet, and then everybody's like, "All right, this sucks," and they all start talking over it. But I got out there, and the volume was as loud as that room could possibly be. I mean, it was just full volume, and I think something had happened where there was when we got there where there was some sort of sewage leak that had happened in the venue,
Okay.
and so the place smelled horrible. They were trying to vent it outside. Everything was just sort of working against all of us, but especially me. I got out there alone, and it was just like 40 minutes of maximum volume of me playing my song. I tell a lot of stories. I do a lot of when I play. Not at this show. It was just it was like being like a piano player at a motel, or a hotel lobby bar somewhere, and nobody gave 1 ounce of caring that I was there, uh, and uh, and so that was you get used to these things. It's like you got to take the good with the bad and those things,
Yeah.
and it's it's you have a uh you kind of have a laugh of it. I think it's a semi-pretentious reference, but I think about the last line in the Camus book, the Stranger, when he says something like, the only like for everything to be, for everything to be to culminate, whatever it is, I forget how it's put. On the day of my execution, I only hope that I'm greeted with cries of hate. That there's something about that you're walking up to it and you're meeting. There's a dissonance here between and a disconnect between where they're at and where I'm at, and that's what it is. And there's no, uh, uh, it's experience of it, which is great.
Yeah, 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 for sure. For sure. Um, what's the Portland scene like, the music scene up there?
Well, I mean, there's tons of great bands up here, and there's tons of cool venues. Since I've been up here, it's been a very kind of interesting chunk of time where we got here in kind of 2017. I had a young kid, and so the only tours I was going on weren't really local stuff. I mean, it was doing more, I'd be like, okay, I'm going to go play the West Coast, or I'm going to go to a festival, I'm going to do that kind of thing. And then, sort of just as I was getting going, then COVID started, and everything really shut down. So I played the Doug Fir a couple times. I played a place called Polaris Hall, and I just played the Portland Folk Festival where I got to meet a bunch of great Portland musicians as well. So I've been here for a minute, but I feel like I still haven't been able to really kind of delve in to this scene a huge amount. I mean, I know there's some great young people like Jeffrey Martin and Anna Tivell who they play at a place right near where I live. I know Anna does a place called Laurel Thirst. I think that's when she's like, working on stuff, something like that. So it's a cool, some great people coming out of here, and I think it's a good place to write music.
Yeah, I heard it's a good music scene, and I heard there's a good folk scene out there too, for sure.
Yeah,
Yeah, yeah.
I think there's a bit of it sort of everywhere now in a great way. I mean, it's that kind of like flattening of everything with now that you know, you can record from anywhere and you can, put it together. But I think Portland has got such a great musical history.
Yeah, for
And,
sure.
especially in that vein, I mean, I know uh, we have friends who just started uh, getting their young sons guitar lessons with the person who taught Elliott Smith. And so that was they were super pumped
That's cool.
as they
That's
should
really
be,
cool.
as they should
Yeah,
be with that. But it's
yeah, yeah.
there's this place has got grit and it's got heart and it's surrounded by kind of beauty and a lot of problems and a lot of everything. And so I think it's a good recipe for um it's a good recipe for music of any kind, but I think
Yeah,
folk especially.
like any town, I guess, right? Any small town.
Yeah.
What's next for you?
Now I'm slowly kind of putting together a touring plan for later in the year, and then now I'm already starting to write the next album. So hopefully I'll have that together, in the next few months, and then get back into the studio and kind of keep the ball rolling.
Awesome. Well, I just want to thank you for your time, Eddie. I appreciate it. And
Thank you, Robert. Thank you for having me.
we'll talk soon.